Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Divinity School's Wednesday Community Lunch. I'm Terry Owens, and we have students here, so welcome to those of you who are visiting to hear our guest speaker today, Stephanie Arnold. Tara Wine is not feeling well, so let's send good thoughts her way, otherwise she would be here. She asked me to step in and host in her stead. First, we always want to thank our illustrious Wednesday lunch crew for another delicious meal. Who is the chef today?
It's Rachel, but she's in class.
Okay, Rachel. In a sense, but this meal is always prepared from scratch right there in our own kitchens. And you get everything for $5, which is an amazing thing. Don't forget to sign up, sending an email to divinityLunch@gmail if you want to attend future Wednesday lunches, just so that we are sure that we have enough food for you. Any community announcements? Yes.
Hi, I'm Danielle. I'm a third-year MA here in Divinity School, and I'm the co-coordinator for the 101s. We have a 101 tonight at 7 p.m. in the Divinity Disciples House, which is on 57th Street. And it is going to be a Buddhist Philosophy 101 by Mark Sideris, who is actually a PR speaker from last night. So it's no prior knowledge required. We're going to have snacks, we'll have drinks, and we're going to get into some Buddhist philosophy in a very elementary way. So do attend, do let me know if you're interested in hearing about other ones.
Great. Any other announcements? Yes.
Hi, the Craft of Teaching is hosting the Dean's Seminar on Friday next week. The RSVP is due on Monday this coming week, so it's from 12 to 2, and the guest speaker is Mark Wallace. He's going to be talking about the relationship between pedagogy and institutional citizenship. So I hope to see you there.
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Constant. I'm the coordinator for Open Space this year. Next Tuesday, Open Space in Blanche Chapel at noon. Time for reflection and community and coffee and tea as well. Our speaker will be Nora Zaki, a third-year MDiv, speaking on the quarter's theme of what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life.
That's an awesome thing. Great to see how people will answer that.
Yes. It's been fascinating.
Great. Any other announcements? Well, if nothing else is needed to be said, I am so pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Stephanie Arnold. Stephanie has a really interesting and compelling story. She contacted me by phone, I think last spring maybe, and she has written a book called 37 Seconds. It is the story of her basically dying for 37 seconds, but not even so much. We hear a lot of near-death stories, but Stephanie had visions about her own death, and she'll get into much more detail about that. There's a movie in the works about this story, and she's trying to engage communities like ours who are interested in dealing with the big questions of a human phenomenon known as religion. And she was really eager to have a conversation here at the Divinity School with us. And this, as you know, we have all kinds of speakers here at Wednesday lunch, so I think this is the perfect place, and Taryn was able to schedule her in this quarter. Her husband, Jonathan, is an alumnus of the Booth School of Business, although it wasn't the Booth School when we were here. It was the Graduate School of Business. So they're all in the family here, and we're just very glad to have them. So I'm going to yield the floor to Stephanie. Let's welcome her.
Thank you so much for having me here. I felt like I was stalking Terry for a long time here. Not just because I wanted to be to tell my husband that, hey, I get to speak at your alma mater, but it's most certainly because I want to hear from your minds about what the process is that I went through and your perspective on it. Just a footnote that I wouldn't tell any other group that I talked to, that my husband and I actually got married on this campus. We eloped and got married at Blanche Chapel. So walking through the halls, and we were now married 8 years, And when I went downstairs to get coffee, I'm like, we've been here before. And he was like, yes, this is where we went before we went to go to the chapel. I will give you, I'll show you a little video. I was on Dr. Oz show last year, and I'll give you an introduction into the story from Dr. Oz's package, because I think he did a really nice job with it. And then I'll fill in the blanks, but just to start there, if that's all right. Hold on.
Where did I go? Oh, there.
I was pregnant with my second child, and we were so excited. At the 20-week ultrasound, I was diagnosed with the placenta previa, which means that the placenta is growing on top of the cervix.
The radiologist made it sound like it was a relatively benign issue, at least at that stage of pregnancy, but my wife's reaction was decidedly different.
I told my husband, I've got a bad feeling about this. I'm O negative, so less than 7% of the population has this blood type. There was this overwhelming fear that I couldn't shake. When I got home, I had my first vision of what was going to happen to me. It was almost like a film strip. I saw me delivering Jacob, everything being fine with him, and then I would see the doctors slicing me open, blood hemorrhaging, and ultimately, I saw me dead on the operating table. I was convinced that I was not going to make it past this delivery. Everybody thought I was crazy.
I did hope that it was nerves and hormones, but it wasn't.
I was seeing things, and then I was feeling them physically, and calling my husband or my doctors and saying, I feel like this is going to happen. Every test that I went into that I was having visions about came back negative. Everything. There was nobody left to speak to, and my doctor suggested I have a consultation with anesthesia. I told her one last time, this is what I was afraid was going to happen. And with that consultation, she flagged my file and incorporated extra blood in the operating room at the time of delivery. A week shy of my scheduled C-section, I looked down at the floor and blood was everywhere. When Stephanie got to the hospital, she was concerned that something horrible was going to happen to her during her delivery. I was 100% positive my visions were going to come true. We began to make our way to the operating room. My body went ice cold. I told my doctor, there's something wrong. Right after delivery, Stephanie had seizure-like activity. We were calling out her name, and then we noticed that she had no heartbeat and flatlined for 37 seconds. Stephanie suffered an extremely rare complication of pregnancy. It's known as an amniotic fluid embolism, and that causes a series of events that leads to a very significant allergic reaction, a catastrophic hemorrhage. She lost the ability to clot her blood. In order to keep Stephanie alive, during the first 24 hours, she was transfused over 60 blood products. As a result of that phone call, we had a crash cart nearby and enough blood reserved for her. I do believe that saved Stephanie's life.
Okay. Still hard to watch. So as you can see, I put back together. and let me just state that I had many visions, and I'll go into much more detail there. The baby is fine. He's 3 years old now. He's in perfect health. I have a 5-year-old who is driving me crazy. So I was diagnosed with this placenta previa, right? So it's watch from where placenta's growing on top of the cervix. You can't deliver naturally. Ultimately, you might have to have a C-section. But I've had a baby before. I'd had a C-section before. This wasn't, I wasn't afraid of that. That wasn't an issue. I am O negative, which is a very rare blood type. And when the radiologist came in, I was splitting our time between New York and Chicago. The radiologist said, it's not a big deal, it's 1 in 200 cases that women have placenta previa, no big deal. And I felt a little off. From that moment on, I went home, I Googled what placenta previa was. My husband, and again, I can tell this crowd that you understand it, the PhD, University of Chicago, analytical, very analytical mind that he is, say, let's not rush to conclusions. It's a 1 in 200 risk. So you have this, but the risk of anything else happening is very low probability, right? So that did not make me feel better, by the way. So here it is, I'm saying, I'm having visions. I'm walking my daughter in a stroller in New York, and it's winter, it's February, and I noticed the fountain in Tribeca Park, and I'm like, oh, it's so beautiful in the spring when the water is flowing. All of a sudden, that water in my mind turned to blood. And it started hemorrhaging, and I felt it in my body. I felt myself actually hemorrhage blood, and I called my husband. I said, I'll meet you at the hospital. I think we just lost the baby. We get to the hospital, get to the ER, get triaged. Everything's fine. So those things started happening on a daily basis, but they happened during the day. They happened at night. I'd be walking in the grocery store, every Friday night we make challah, and I was grabbing the flour for the bread, and I'd have a vision of seeing me sliced open on the operating table, dead. And the feeling was so real that I felt somebody was screaming it in my ear that I needed to pay attention. So with every vision I have, I'd end up going to the emergency room. I'd go to the hospital. I split my time between Chicago and New York, so when I was in Chicago, I would have ultrasounds. We have a friend of ours that was at University of Chicago, and he's a gynoc. He was a gynoc fellow. And I said, I am going to hemorrhage. These organs are going to combine. My placenta and my uterus are going to combine. I'm going to need a hysterectomy. And the baby is going to be fine, and I'm going to die. And he would be like, Stephanie, I think you need to relax. I think you need to de-stress. My husband's a former Air Force pilot as well, so he was not in crisis mode. He was like, everything's fine. The test results are negative. All the doctors are telling you everything's fine. I said, I understand what everybody's saying, but I feel this is going to happen. So our friend who's a gynoc said, so what do I do if I need a hysterectomy and I give birth? And he says, first of all, it's not going to happen. But if it does happen, you really want gynoc to do it. Why? Well, because your obstetrician, your OB-GYN will, if there's an emergency in the operating room, and I might be talking too much to the men in this room that you're like, I didn't really want to know all of these details. But when you give birth and there's an emergency, they call in maternal fetal medicine to do the procedure. Maternal fetal medicine does not have as much experience with emergency, like reproductive organ, especially when you're having so much blood going to this region. You'd rather want gynoc to do it because they have more surgical experience with this. So trying to get an appointment with the head of gynoc over at Northwestern when you are 7 months pregnant, you do not have reproductive organ cancer, and you are telling them you think you're going to need a hysterectomy, you sound like So eventually we got the appointment, and my husband and I are sitting, and God bless my husband because he went with me to every single appointment. I don't know whether he was afraid of divorce or he was afraid of something else, but he actually supported me in that way. So we are in the waiting room. There are women that are suffering from all types of cancers with IVs in their arms. They're struggling, and I am a healthy, for all intents and purposes, just a healthy pregnant woman sitting in there. And when we go into gynoc's office waiting room, he's like, how can I help you with the resident? How can I help you? I'm like, I'm gonna need a hysterectomy. I'm just letting you know, I got very mafia-like. I see you, you see me, I'm your patient, you're my doctor. And he's like, have you been on the internet? And I'm like, yes, but this is going to happen. So everybody again, he's like, so you know what, Stephanie, why don't you get an MRI? If the MRI proves that these organs have combined, then I will book myself the day of your mandatory C-section at 37 weeks. and we'll just do the hysterectomy there under a controlled environment. And I felt better because now all of a sudden I had a homework assignment to do. I felt there was some sort of psychological response to something physiologically happening in my body. And I was like, all right, this is the guy, this is the guru, I have found my answer. So I go to have the MRI, and the MRI is negative. And so my husband says, you should feel better. And I said, I feel worse. I said, because now I'm running out of people to tell this crazy foreboding story to. Who's going to believe me? All the tests are negative. So what does one do when you're in that position? Well, in my case, I posted on Facebook. If anybody has my blood type, I'm gonna need it. I wrote goodbye letters. I sent out goodbye letters. If you saw me on the street getting coffee or something like that, and you said, oh, you hear I'm waddling along, you say, oh, how's the pregnancy going? I would say to you, I'm gonna die. Startling people left and right, but I was hoping and praying that maybe somebody out there would have heard something as crazy as this and said, I've had that feeling before. But nobody did. So I felt very alone, and at one point my gynecologist, whether she felt that she was more my psychologist than my gynecologist, said, why don't you have a consultation with anesthesia? And I said, you know, I didn't have a consultation with anesthesia before, and they said, can you hear me? Is that all right? Okay. And she said, yes, but you know, maybe by you understanding what's going to happen with anesthesia, then maybe that'll just calm you down. So I call on the phone, I have a phone consult. Anesthesia answers, and she explains what will happen when you get the epidural and what happens during delivery and where you recover. And I held my breath for a moment. I said, I know all this. I said, now, what happens if this, and this happens? And she held her breath, and she answered however she answered. And then I said, you know what, it is what it is. There's no other option. If any one of you in this room have a crazy foreboding feeling and you're about to have elective surgery, you just don't do it. But this baby was coming out no matter what. So I didn't have a choice. So at 36 weeks to the day, God works in mysterious ways. My husband was not there. He was in New York at the time. I was in Chicago. And I started bleeding all over the kitchen floor, like the video said. I get to the hospital. My daughter is there, who's a year and a half. My nanny's there, and everything's quiet. My husband's on the plane. We're Skype chatting, and I know that this is going to be the last time that I speak to him, and I'm only going to be texting him. And what do you say to the love of your life, the person that you've created this world with? What do you say to your daughter who's growing that you know is not going to remember you because she's a year and a half? So I do my best. I tell Jonathan, thank you for making me the happiest woman in the world, for loving me this way. Please love this child with everything you have. Love your children as you do, and know that I love you. And then he still wasn't giving into anything. He didn't want it. He later tells me he didn't want to give any of my thoughts, negative thoughts. So he just blocked it out, compartmentalized it however he did. And he's like, where do I meet you? And I'm like, 8th floor recovery, hopefully. I kissed my daughter a million times. And the doctor's like, we're going to be back with your brother soon. And I held back the tears, and the maternal instinct kicks in because I want my daughter to remember me as strong and happy and loving. And as the gurney takes me out down to the operating floor, I break down in tears because I'm convinced it's the last time I will ever see her. So I go into the operating room. They're preparing me, and I tell my doctor, there is something wrong. You need to put me under general anesthesia. My doctor's like, I think you're just nervous. Jonathan's not here. And at that point, there's no going anywhere, right? You're under these lights. This is D-Day. This is delivery day. This is entering the room that's going to give life to my son and take mine. So everything's prepared. I just go silent. Jacob is born, healthy, happy. And 3 seconds later, I'm dead. So what happened? I ended up, like the video said, I had an amniotic fluid embolism. It's a very rare 1 in 40,000 risk where amniotic cells get into the mother's bloodstream, and if you happen to be allergic to it, your body goes into somewhat of an anaphylactic shock. And in most cases, women don't make it. There's a nurse here in the room that's actually had in her 20-year career as a nurse, an obstetric nurse, has had 2. 1 did not make it. The majority don't make it, and the ones that do survive don't survive well. The first phase of an AFE is cardiac arrest, lungs shutting down. My body went into just a complete seizure and shock. And then the second phase starts, which is an anesthesiologist's worst nightmare. It's called DIC. And it's disseminate, how is it? Disseminate, intravascular coagulate. Thank you. And so memory isn't like what it's a bad thing. So some anesthesiologists I've heard have nicknamed it "death is coming." Your normal body has about 20 units of blood. I was given 60 units of blood and blood product. That one phone call I made 2 weeks before I delivered to that anesthesiologist, she later told me something in my voice when I was telling her that story. She said she had never had a patient speak so clearly before about what was going to happen. I'd had a baby before, had had a C-section before, and had sought out specialists to help save her life. And with that one phone call, out of everybody I spoke to, she flagged my file and incorporated extra blood in a crash cart in the operating room. That is 100% why I'm alive. I also found out later that she's a very spiritual doctor. She does not rely solely on the tests and the data. She relies on a feeling, that intuitive feeling that I guess I had and she had. And the day that I went in for delivery, that flag came up and she was on call. She was in the operating room at the time. She didn't need to be there because there was an attending anesthesiologist there. She goes to the anesthesiologist right before I deliver and she said, "I've got a bad feeling." So all of this happens. Jonathan shows up. My kidneys failed, lungs bladder, everything was in total disarray. And then they stabilized me and they put me into ICU. I can't even imagine what my husband was feeling like while he's watching me on life support and seeing everything happen. And as he is processing this, the anesthesiologist comes out and explains to him what happens to me. Something hit him. He doesn't say that it came from a spiritual place, but I say it does. But he said in the middle of the conversation, apropos of nothing, he says, "If she needs a hysterectomy, this is the doctor we met with." She said, the anesthesiologist said, "She won't survive another surgery right now, and I think we've got the blood, stabilized. So we're going to move her to ICU, and let's see what happens overnight." Everything's calm in the operating room, or everything's calm in the ICU, and about 7 hours later, all the bells and whistles go off. They rush into the room to take me, and they say she's still hemorrhaging. She needs a hysterectomy. We called the doctor she met with 2 months before, and he's scrubbing in to perform the hysterectomy. When they did the hysterectomy and they did the pathology on the uterus, they saw that those organs had combined. It was just a microscopic hole that was created, and it was undetectable over the MRI. So I had this conversation with my husband, and interestingly enough, this week we just discussed the science spiritual aspect, and I said, what part of the story is really hard for you to grasp? Because I'm very much interested in every single mind in this room and how you're processing this. So I look at the intuitive side and the, I don't have another word for it other than intuition. I believe in the sixth sense. I believe that it exists. There's so many examples you can have of maternal instinct and gut instinct. However, any doctor could say, well, the premonitions are interesting because people can have a heart attack and they can have a sense of foreboding before the heart attack, right? There's something happening in the body and you can feel it. Now, could they 3 months before detect that this, like all 6 of the premonitions I was having would happen exactly the way I was saying? I don't think so, but maybe science can explain it. What my husband and others like him have problems with is this next part of the story. So I go through recovery. I'm in a medically induced coma for 6 days. When I come out of the coma, aside from saying, I told you also, I had a hard time. And, everybody's like, okay, through recovery, dialysis, everything that I was going through, I kept asking people, how was I saw everything 3 months before it happened? And I went from therapist to doctor. My medical team practices medicine differently since this case, but I will explain a little bit more about that now, which I'm completely grateful for. So through this process, I go from therapist, and I say, I need to know how it is I saw it. And they're like, let's not worry about that right now. Let's just worry about getting you out of the trauma. And I said, see, I can't do that, because what happens if I have another premonition? What's going to happen then? Am I going to freeze? And I'm not going to you anymore. So ultimately, I had a friend of mine recommend regression therapy. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with regression therapy, but what regression therapy does is uses hypnotherapy to take you back into the moments of trauma. And using that, what they try and do is that they give you a new perspective on the trauma. So this already happened to a part of you. This already traumatized a part of you. But when I take you back, this is not going to be as traumatic, hopefully healing you, and you move forward, and you can go visit the hospital, and you can go connect with your child and be a wife again and a mother. What I didn't expect was what was going to happen. So I am going to show you, okay, one thing about me is my background was in television. So I am as cynical a person as possible, and I always do my research, and I always want, when I was casting shows or anything like that, I would always, your interview process is really intense, and you have to have cross your T's and dot your I's. You have to make sure the person you're talking to is not so crazy, right? So, because they can do crazy things on television. You want that, but you don't really. So I videotaped my therapy. And my husband says, why would you do something like that? I said, well, first of all, I've never been hypnotized before. And if I'm with a quack that's making me do something that I'm in the middle of the night, I'm going to bark like a dog. I want to know. Right? So I'm going to show you a clip that basically broke the glass ceiling for my therapy. It took many, many hours to get to this point. If my husband gets up and leaves, I'm going to give him permission to get up and leave, because he can only watch this for a second because it's quite traumatizing for him. But I will show that to you. It's up to you if you want to. Okay. You're going to stay? Okay. So on the screen, you will see my therapist on the right. Let me see. And then you will see me on the left. And so, surprisingly, my therapy was done over Skype. Shocking that it worked, but I think for me, being in my own home and doing this therapy, it's on?
No, it's on.
Okay. Doing this therapy over Skype, I was a little bit more confident that I wasn't going to get hypnotized, and that I also wasn't going to get hurt. That if something was bothering me, I just shut down the computer. So I just sat back and I probably relaxed a lot more because I was in my house. Okay, so my therapist is on the right, and this is the moment she takes me back into the operating room, and then I discuss what I see.
Very quickly, and I'm going to brace you, and I'm going to hold on to you, and I'm not going to let go. It came up, and my eyes rolled back. My chest was out and stopped breathing, and I had a seizure. And And I heard them screaming because they said, Stephanie. And Nicole ran to the head of the bed. And she's turning blue. And the EKG machine went flat. And I was done. And my body just collapsed. And I heard them say, hit the button. Call the code. Hit the button. I hit the button. 40 doctors and nurses just rushed in. They're like, get the cart. They got it up. One of the nurses was very strong and big, started the compressions. They were pounding on my chest and doing CPR. Once they heard it, and Julie was to the right, she said, this can't be happening. Can't be happening. And Nicole said it's an AFE, it's the only thing that could do this. And Grace is like, it is an AFE. She did cardiac arrest. And they're like, get the blood ready. Bring in the cart. And the first cart they had revved up wasn't working, so they had to get a second cart in. And they were pounding on my chest. And they did the compressions 2 or 3 times. I think it was 3 times. Oh God. And it's been okay.
You can see why my husband really didn't watch it. That was just a little glimpse into it. I go on for a good 40 minutes describing what is happening in the operating room, where the doctors were, what was happening down the hall, what was happening in the nurses' station, where the nurses' break room was, which nurse actually gave me CPR. That the first crash cart didn't work, the second crash cart did. Things that wouldn't be in medical files, and things that I wouldn't know. And as the brain is shutting down, hearing is the last to go, and I absolutely give that to you. When you're having a C-section, there's a curtain in front of your face, so you can't see anything that's going on below your neck, right? So, and then when you're in the middle of this and they're intubating you, they tape your eyes shut. So, you know, my husband looks at this briefly and he says, how do you know this is not a recalled episode of Grey's Anatomy? Right. So I say, after I'm done calling him a few names, I said, you know, one of the things, I said, the one thing I can tell you is I feel better. And the therapist did tell me, you may never be able to prove what you saw is real, but if you feel better, then you're purging the trauma from your body. That wasn't good enough for me. Because I have witnesses. I have doctors that were present. I have nurses that were present. I can actually map out the back rooms of labor and delivery where I'm not allowed to go. And I can tell you what was going on during that time. So my husband says, I want to watch the doctor's answers live when you play this video down. I said, no problem. So I give these tapes to my doctors. And they said, I don't know how you know any of this. I didn't go to medical school for this. But it's accurate down to exactly where we were standing. And I said to my doctor, I said, did you say this can't be happening, this can't be happening? She said, I did, but in my head. So that's the big question mark in my husband's head. So like, what happens then? And I saw many more things. I write about it in the book. I write about some instances that happened as a child. Once I had all this information, I was like, maybe this can help people. And so I wrote everything down. HarperCollins bought the book rights, and the book released last year. We became a bestseller. It's in 12 countries, and it's growing, and we have a movie in the works. And I'm realizing, outside of all of that, that I survived for many reasons. But there are a couple of key messages outside of we are not alone, because I know every person in this room has probably felt something a little coincidental, so to speak, that something happened at the right time, at exactly the right time when you needed it. But you need to be your own best advocate. If you sense something, you need to say something. I don't care how many people tell you no. And I don't care how many doctors say that that's impossible, that can't happen. I talked to a lot of people, and ultimately one listened, and that's why I'm alive. And the second thing is, doctors are changing the way they practice medicine because of it. My doctors listen to patients differently, and that is the most I can help, a wish for through this process. That the medical institutions listen differently, that spirituality belongs in a place when you're dealing with health and wellness. And I'm just grateful that my family can stay together. I am alive and so incredibly honored to be here. Thank you.
We do have time for questions, about 10 minutes or so. So I know this is what Stephanie's really anxious to do, is to interact with you. So.
Yes.
Thank you. First, thank you to you and your husband for sharing your story and your experiences with us. It's very moving. I'm curious if this was the first time in your life that you'd experienced some sort of sense of knowing, and if not, I guess how you would address or make sense of the confidence you felt. Because I think so often, maybe we have had those experiences of knowing, but the confidence in telling others and pushing for it is sometimes lacking.
It's a great question. I did have feelings as a kid, but as a kid, half of the time I was wrong. But when they were right, they were so right, but I had these feelings about other people, and I'd say, this person's going to die in the next 2 days, and then they die, and I was 10 years old, and I'm like, I'm wishing this for somebody, and you shut it down. So maybe the intuitive side of me could pick up things, right? The premonitions still keep coming. So it is not something that has shut down just because of this experience. It continues to, and my husband listens differently now. But the way that I describe the premonitions versus a casual thought is that if the hair on the back of your head is standing up, and if something is screaming at you so that it's incessant, it does not give up. You have this overwhelming feeling like something bad is about to happen. It doesn't mean that exactly what you think is going to happen. However, what is the worst thing in the world? What's the worst thing in the world? I would have been wrong. So I would have sent the doctors a fruit basket, and I would have apologized. And I was the crazy hormonal pregnant chick here, but you know what? I'm cool. But on the off chance you could be right, it's not worth staying quiet if you can save your life.
Well, that was just a riveting story, thank you. And I'm so touched that you feel comfortable sharing this publicly, and hopefully it does a lot of good for women and for men who feel that they're not being listened to by traditional medical practitioners, but understand their bodies intimately well to have a sense that they need something additional in their care. So I'm a sociologist, and I love evidence-based research and lots of kind of like randomized big data sets. And I also know that there's a lot of important study on how it is that, like the history of medicine shows women at different times have been demonized or categorized as witches or as like evil doers, often in relationship to their bodies in pregnancy. So now that you are out with this story, I'm interested in kind of like how you've had positive but also maybe negative responses, or people who say this cannot be true, or again, chalk it up to hormones. And then like the second part of that, this rather long question, is like what are some specific ways that you see your doctors changing their relationships to parents?
Excellent. This is why I'm here. I'm so excited. Okay, so as far as the negative when people read the book, what I found is in a small percentage of people, they'll either, I'm Jewish, so they'll be like, this is Jewish rhetoric, or this is, just kind of, shrugging off. Nothing, it's really been grasped. I say the core audience has been the hopeful agnostic, if you will, right? So the people that are reading the book that feel or hear the story or share the story are saying, well, what she saw in 37 seconds and what she wrote about, I already knew that. So that's the kind of negative feedback I've been getting. I'm like, well, if you want me to tell you that I rode a unicorn through a rainbow and everything, but I can't prove it, that's all well and good, but I limited everything in the book, and I had a scientist by my side saying, you can't prove this, don't put this in. So I limited the book to everything that I could prove, right? So no, I haven't gotten that feedback of really anything negative in that respect. In fact, it's been the opposite. I'd say 80+% have grabbed hold of it and said, this is just proof that there's something else out there that science can't explain. And then from the second part of your question?
Yeah, what are some ways that you push
sure.
that medical team now
So
responding?
my anesthesiologist became an anesthesiologist because she didn't want to talk to patients. Right? Most anesthesiologists put people to sleep, wake up, you meet your anesthesiologist 5 minutes before. She said, now when a patient has a fear, even if it's not warranted for anything, she will actually hold their hand. She will listen to them. My doctor, who has a very good bedside manner, said, I take an extra beat if that person wants to talk a little bit more, because had I known that anesthesiologist flagged my file, which I did not, but had I known at the time that she flagged my file, I probably would have relaxed slightly more than I was all tensed up prior to going in, because I would have felt that they were prepared in the event of worst case scenario. And and so now they listen differently, at least the doctors that I've been encountering. Yes.
First, thank you for presenting this. I've got kind of a comment and a question. So as I was listening to this, I was reflecting on myself. And I'm a thoroughgoing kind of rationalist, naturalist, kind of skeptical of, anything supernatural at all. And part of my own kind of engagement with religion as a practitioner and otherwise is figuring out how to reconcile my intellectual kind of rejection of supernaturalism with a very tangible experience that I had similarly around a car accident and the death of my father and a premonition that I had, kind of me being able to survive the last second. It's a very similar, a different story in a different context, and I've yet to process that fully, and so I'm really interested in the therapy, the regression therapy that you've talked about, but I'm interested in how you've experienced people who do have a scientific, rationalistic mind, who aren't necessarily just given to conversation about the supernatural or things happening outside of kind of scientific reason, how they've responded to this, and then related to that, in your engagement with the whole kind of regression therapy, how have you found public acceptance of that type of therapy shifting or changing as you've engaged people?
Well, I'll take the regression therapy first. So the regression therapy is definitely considered parapsychology. It's not as widely accepted. And my therapist had done work, doing past life regression. She's like, oh, you want me to send past life? I'm like, I'm not interested in that because I can't prove it. If I was a prostitute in past life or I was whatever, I'm like, how can I prove it? So it's not, that was not what I was interested in. I was interested in the 6 days that I lost of my life, and I wanted to be part of that society. And what was everybody doing? So the proof is in that I was able to recount, and I talk about it a lot, of what happened in those days. And there's no way I could have known what was happening outside of the hospital and what people were wearing and what they were doing during that time, down to such little details, and the people that I saw and what was surrounding, without some other explanation, right? I couldn't get up and walk, so it wasn't like I couldn't do it. So so it's becoming more and more accepted because the proof is documented, extremely well documented, and the doctors are there backing me up as a witness, and my husband is backing me up as all of that. I think my husband is better suited, if he wouldn't mind answering your question regarding how scientific minds are responding to the story, and I'm not, like, I like putting him on the spot every now and then, but, you know, you guys are pretty good at it. Go on the spot. But I think that he can answer because he's been a witness to many people coming up to me and having a conversation from an outsider looking in and seeing where the change is. Sweetheart?
Sure. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, of course, I can only speak from my own experience, but I would describe myself as being an agnostic. Certainly prior to this experience, I think that people that are true believers and people that are hardcore atheists are have sort of making the same common mistake, if you will, and that is drawing a definitive, conclusive conclusion based on what is fundamentally partial or incomplete information. So I think that we as scientists, or those of us who sort of consider ourselves part of the hard science or social science arena, need to remind ourselves that the whole process of science is that of discovery, and you don't want to prejudge a conclusion. You don't want to exclude a certain possibility from a set of possible outcomes, nor do you want to necessarily include a possible state of affairs into what the possible outcomes are of any particular social science experiment, if you will. So I think that actually is fundamentally connected with the principles of the University of Chicago and our overall approach to analysis and research. So I would urge everybody to keep an open mind, whether you're predisposed for the existence of God or against the existence of God, or just the existence of some additional sense that we haven't yet discovered using the scientific method, and that they're just incomplete data sets that we're trying to fill in. That's what we're all trying to do, whether we believe in the existence of God or the opposite. So, so for me, the regression experience and seeing the reaction by the doctors and the nurses from what my wife saw during and articulated during her regression therapy, for me, that is a problem, quote unquote, if your prior is that God doesn't exist and there's no additional sense or dimension to life. I think it actually it supports the view that there is this additional dimension. And I say that even though when my wife was in the ICU, and I was told that there's a 1 in 40,000 chance of having an AFE, and Northwestern delivers 12,000 babies a year, what do I do as a PhD economist? I'm thinking to myself, well, if there's 1 in 40,000 chance of delivering 12,000, what's the probability of having 0 AFEs in any given year? What's the probability of having 1 or 2? And you, as other people in the audience, probably know that that's a hypergeometric distribution. It's well defined. It's very hard to calculate when you're using numbers like 40,000 and 12,000 because it sort of gets to the limit of computers because they're using factorials. But it's a really good way to pass the time. My wife is on life support.
Let's see, a couple. It's 1:15. If you have to leave for class, we understand, but we'll try to get these in.
Yeah, and let me just add to your statement, because you've had your own personal experience with it, you need to open it up a little further. Because towing the line with God is not possible protects you from the impossible.
Hi, thank you for your story. I'm visiting here to determine if I'm going to get a PhD here or not. So I'm a historian of magic, and new religious movements. So
a historian of magic?
Magic.
That is so cool.
Not very lucrative though. So I've had to deal with a lot of very fantastic claims, and insofar as your story goes, it's relatively actually normal in comparison. Like you're not experiencing like bleeding virgins and things like that. But you mentioned some of the things that you couldn't include because you couldn't prove it.
Right.
What would be the most supernatural claim that you haven't shared?
There were things in the book that I was able to prove that I saw. So when I flatlined and I did the regression therapy, there are moments in my therapy where I talk about seeing hundreds of spirits. Okay, so I didn't see God, I didn't see what heaven looked like. It was a very warm, just comfortable environment, like you're in clouds standing on sand. That's what it felt like. I didn't look down at feet because I didn't want to know exactly where I was. But there were hundreds and hundreds of spirits. And I saw people that I knew. And that's okay. You can make up in your head that, I've read stories about when people are traumatized or going through a near-death experience, they reach out to the people they love the most and that they're there to support them and help them. The kicker is that there were people I didn't know. And there were people that I didn't know, including my husband's father, who I never met, and my best friend's little brother, who was 7 when he died at the time. And there were detailed messages that they gave me. Now, but like I said, I got the messages, and I called, the little boy said to me, when you see my sister, tell her that I miss how she twirled my hair. So it was very specific, twirled my hair. I said, okay, what do I do with that information? I'm like, I don't even know, and I don't want to disrupt her life, and I don't even know what I'm seeing, and how could I possibly be seeing this, whatever. So I tell my friend this, and I'm like, does this mean anything to you? She dropped the phone and started crying, and she's like, why would you say that? And I said, I don't even know what I said. I don't even know if I'm right. I don't even know how I said it, whatever. And she's like, I used to twirl his hair every night to put him to sleep. And so, something I didn't know, right? My husband's father was there. He was dressed in a tweed jacket. It was a very specific color, lining, and there was a coin in his hand. And I go into great detail about the coin in his hand. And he had passed away in 1998. I had never met him, and I go to my husband, I'm like, I saw your father. He's like, tell him I said hi. I said, okay. I said, did your father have a tweed jacket? It was yellow mustard, it had patches on the elbows, it had a green stripe in it, and a lapel. He's like, my father never had a tweed jacket. I said, okay, fine. So I go from family member to family member. One family member says to me, what is Jonathan talking about? That yellow mustardy one that had yellow beige patches on the elbows and it had a green lapel and it had this and that. I said, yes. I said, and she was going into more detail. I said, that's his favorite jacket. And I go to my husband, I said, what are you talking about? That's his favorite jacket. And he said, well, if you would have said herringbone, so me, the idiot that I am, I'm like, what's herringbone? He's like, it's a stitch in a tweed jacket. I'm going to kill you. You're making me crazy. And so then I said, okay, what about the coin? I said, it's not a U.S. coin. The coin is shaped misshapenly, and it's not silver. It's not gold. I said, it's got this insignia on it. It's not this. And I'm like, he was twirling it in his hands. He's like, I don't know what the heck you're talking about, right? So I go from family member to family member to family member. Nobody knows about the coin. I'm sitting with his brother, his younger brother. And he's like, oh, how's your regression therapy going? And he's like, oh, she saw Dad. And so then I asked you a question. I said, do you know anything about a coin? And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, he says, well, I was cleaning out one of Dad's suitcases the other day, and behind the zipper in the crevice of the suitcase was a coin. I said, can you describe that coin for me, please? And it was almost verbatim about this coin. So I look at my husband and I say, F you. And then I come back and I said, I now understand the message, because what I'm given is just like the premonitions. I'm given little video clips, and maybe that's because my profession was television and they are little clips. Maybe if somebody was into music, they'd hear it in a musical instrument or what have you. But for me, the medium is television. So I see these 3-second clips, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I know what the message is, but I was like having to sleuth it to figure it out. His brother was there the day his father died of a massive heart attack. That coin is from Croatia. So the coin signified a really beautiful memory of the two of them together, having enjoyment and vacation. He wants his son to remember that moment and the fact that he couldn't do anything to help save his life when he was in his care, like when they were together. I was like, like it all pieced together. So those are the kind of things. But I was able to follow through and get those documented because there's no way I would have known it.
Cool. I think we're just one more. We're running out of time.
I just want to ask about regression therapy because most of the people I know who've done it have been victims of sexual assaults. Unfortunately. And it's been very useful now.
Don't forget to bus, excuse me, you could just take, I forgot to mention this, take your dirty dishes back to the table and your silverware into the soapy bag. That would be a great help to us. Thank you.
So, I mean, for them, it's more maybe, like you mentioned, a place, or if it's a person, being able to be in an environment where you're not going to like experience a trauma or have a breakdown or something.
Right.
Have you been able to talk to other people who have done regression therapy who either notice premonitions or have some weird sight that they didn't realize previously until they've done the therapy?
I have not.
Okay.
I have not. I mean, I went through a not so typical version of therapy because typical therapy wasn't helping me. So nothing about my story was typical. So I was like, oh, I may as well try something totally off guard in that respect. But no, I have not.
Great. Well, that'll have to be it. Let's thank Stephanie. If you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it if you found the talk interesting, and look for that movie.
Yes.